After Nezuko's sudden change and the end of the battle between the two demons, the Hashira Training Arc begins. We learn that there are plans to relocate the swordsmith village due to the battle. These plans were put into action immediately because the demons would undoubtedly attack again at nightfall. We also discover that, despite two high-ranking demons attacking the village, the overall damage was minimal thanks to the hunters' efforts. Back at the hideout, Tanjiro talks with Goto, the Kikuchi, at the Butterfly Mansion after waking up from 7 days of rest following the fight. Goto informs Tanjiro that these swordsmiths have several empty villages prepared for emergencies like this. After further conversation, Goto says he wanted to ask Tanjiro about something incredible that happened with Nezuko. Nonchalantly, Tanjiro responds that she can now walk in the sunlight, commenting on the absurdity of the situation while continuing to eat. Then, without thinking, Tanjiro lets slip that Tamayo is investigating the reason and how Nezuko managed to conquer the sun. Since Goto doesn't know who Tamayo is, he questions Tanjiro about it, causing Tanjiro to choke on his food, diverting Goto from the topic. While Goto jokes about how everything will be peaceful until Zenitsu shows up, it suddenly cuts to the yellow-haired maniac arriving at the Butterfly Mansion after a mission and discovering that Nezuko can now walk in the sun and talk. Zenitsu screams loudly, saying he's having a heart attack, and grabs Nezuko before shouting more about how cute and absolutely wonderful it is that Nezuko can be in the sun. He screams for her to marry him, and then she says the words, "Welcome back, Inosuke." Zenitsu's mood shifts immediately, and he says he will burn Inosuke alive, quickly explaining that Inosuke had visited the Butterfly Mansion a few days ago and made it his mission to ensure Nezuko could say his name. Later that same day, an emergency meeting was held at the Ubuyashiki estate. Sanemi, Iguro, Muichiro, Mitsuri, Gyomei, Shinobu, and Ju are all present. After the Hashira greet each other, Kagaya Ubuyashiki's wife makes her appearance in place of her husband, as his illness has left him completely bedridden and unable to move. The stone Hashira, Gyomei, immediately kneels upon hearing this information and says he prays with all his heart that his master's life continues to shine, even if only for one more day. Once the meeting begins, a man brings information about a certain demon who managed to conquer the sun, obviously referring to the impressive Nezuko. He says that because of this, they will soon find themselves in a large-scale war. After a while, he mentions the strange marks that appeared on Mitsuri and Muichiro that day, and Amain explains what they are. These are marks that many of the first swordsmen, who were a step away from defeating Muzan, possessed. They manifested marks similar to demonic patterns. This information was hidden because many people resented not having the marks. Over time, the information became obscure, but one thing that was passed down indefinitely is that whoever had the mark would start spreading it to others who qualified. Amain says that the first person to manifest the mark didn't hold the Hashira rank. Instead, the first person to gain this mark in generations was none other than Tanjiro. When asked how he felt about having the mark, he had no idea, so they decided not to press him on it. But now that two other people have gained the mark, Amain asks them to teach the others how it happened. Unfortunately, Kanroji had difficulty putting it into words and just embarrasses herself when all she can manage are vague descriptions, mostly composed of sounds about how it felt. But Muichiro has an idea about what could cause the mark to appear on someone. Muichiro explains that during his fight, he was poisoned, so he used his breathing technique to slow his blood circulation. A boy who tried to help him almost got killed, and he began to remember his past memories. He became so consumed by rage that he completely lost control of his emotions. He says he thinks his heart rate exceeded 200 beats per minute, and his body temperature surpassed 39 degrees Celsius. Muichiro continues, stating that those who do not possess the mark, even if qualified, do not receive it because they would die, but those whose bodies can withstand the extreme conditions will have the mark, which will enhance their fighting ability. Confused about the specifics, Amain asks what made him think his temperature was 39 degrees. Muichiro replies that when he was 9 years old, Shinobu was treating his injuries and reported that he had a fever of 39 degrees. He says he felt exactly the same way when the mark appeared. After everyone reacts about how they will try to obtain the mark, Amain says there is one thing she must tell everyone about manifesting the mark. She states that for those who have already manifested the mark, it is too late. Those who do not manifest the mark, without exception, will die. Amain then withdraws as the Hashira are about to discuss training. Tomioka stands up and states that there is no need or reason for him to stay any longer. This leaves the other Hashira confused as to why he thinks he doesn't need to be there, but his only explanation is that he is different from them. Completely irritated by this, Sanemi says he doesn't believe it and asks Tomioka if he looks down on the other Hashira. Tomioka doesn't explain himself, leading Sanemi to attack him. But as this happens, the stone Hashira, Gyomei, says that everyone should sit down and continue talking, as he has a proposal. Then it cuts to Haganazuka, who has arrived at the Butterfly Mansion to deliver Tanjiro his reforged sword. Struggling to breathe, sweat dripping from the blacksmith's mask, Haganazuka suddenly takes out Tanjiro's new sword, which has Rengoku's sheath firmly attached, and hands it to him. At Goto's request, he sits before urging Tanjiro to unsheath the blade. Tanjiro is completely impressed by the beauty of the blade, and Haganazuka says it is made of high-quality steel and must have been used by a very strong swordsman. The blade has the character for slay, pronounced Mitsu, which can also mean destruction in Japanese. Haganazuka also explains that this blade was probably made before the demon hierarchy was established, and that is why many of the Hashira have the kanji pronounced Akimitsu engraved on their blades, which means destroy all evil demons in Japanese. Tanjiro then says he doesn't remember seeing those words on the swords when he used them. Quickly, Haganazuka goes into a furious monologue about how Tanjiro caused irreparable damage to the blade because he used it while it was still in the early stages of sharpening. He then withdraws after Tanjiro promises to bring him dumplings until the day he dies. Hearing the commotion, a disheartened Jenny complains about how noisy Tanjiro and his guests are. Tanjiro apologizes and begins to say he has finished, but he cannot finish because Inosuke enters the room by breaking the window, completely destroying it in the process. The shirtless boy then starts shouting incessantly that group training starts now. As a large group of demon hunters is seen sweating profusely while running down a gorge, it is explained through Zenitsu that the special training, known as Hashira Training, had begun. This training was to ensure that those below the rank of Hashira could train with each pillar individually, in a different order to strengthen the demon hunters. This is actually a special exercise because usually the Hashira would only train with their successors. But since Nezuko's sudden change, demon appearances have completely stopped, leaving the Hashira to do their security tasks at night and focus on training the demon hunters during the day. After hearing all this information, Tanjiro happily comments that it is incredible, but Zenitsu immediately interrupts him, saying that it is not incredible at all but terrible. It is complete hell. Tanjiro counters by saying that fighting someone stronger is the best way to improve quickly and that by facing them, you can absorb wisdom during the fight to strengthen yourself as well. Hearing this, Zenitsu attacks and bites Tanjiro's head, yelling at him and saying that they are no longer friends from that moment on. He then storms off. Tanjiro tries to stop him and eventually Zenitsu turns around to listen to Tanjiro telling him that during his fight with the higher-ranked demon, he used the trick Zenitsu taught him for thunder breathing. He tries to use this to make Zenitsu realize that connections with others help in difficult times. So everything he learns during Hashira training will eventually bring benefits in the future. Once again, Zenitsu's mood instantly changes from annoyed to extremely happy, trying to tell Tanjiro that it doesn't change his mood at all as he runs out of the room. A random crow flies through the window and hits Tanjiro directly on the forehead. The crow then delivers a letter to Tanjiro. Jumping away from the mysterious letter, we find ourselves with the most flamboyant man, our retired god, the great man Tengen Uzui. Tengen yells at the younger hunters training under his supervision for being late and says they can barely run, shouting at them to stop licking the ground while he hits them with his bakudo. This reveals the position the Hashira have taken in training the younger hunters, with Tengen and his strenuous basic physical exercises being the first trial, followed by lessons from Mitsuri on flexibility and high-speed movement with Tokito, then swordsmanship training with the Serpent Hashira and lessons on infinite attacks with the Wind Hashira, finally ending with the maximum strength training session with the Stone Hashira, Gyomei. With this constant training, the overall strength of the Hashira should be further improved, and if this somehow creates the right conditions to manifest their marks, it would be perfectly ideal. As for those who have already manifested the mark, they just need to maintain their condition. Hopefully, with everything learned by each member, this will also increase the overall strength of the core in preparation for the upcoming battle. Leaving the explanation, we find Tomioka sitting alone. Suddenly, Tanjiro appears and, without hesitation, enters Tomioka's house, leaving him completely stunned by the random scenario. After Tanjiro explains the training session to the Water Hashira, he says that in 7 days he will be able to return to action and would like Tomioka to train him, to which he refuses. Tomioka explains that he is not angry, but that he should become the new Water Hashira. Tanjiro apologizes, saying that he spoke with Urokodaki about breathing styles and how it is not uncommon that sometimes one can change their breathing style and give rise to a new one. He states that water breathing techniques are close to the fundamentals, so they help give rise to many new styles. Tomioka tells Tanjiro not to say that because currently, there is no Water Hashira, so someone must fill that role as soon as possible. Confused, Tanjiro asks about this and is informed that Giyu Tomioka is not the Water Hashira. While Tanjiro stands there stunned, he remembers the letter he received earlier. This letter was from Kagaya Abuyashiki and he specifically asked Tanjiro to go talk to Giyu because he doesn't think he can do it in his current state. Kagaya says this is an incredibly important moment when everyone must come together. Giyu prefers to do things alone. Remembering the master's words, Tanjiro reiterates the idea that he will be persistent and continue talking to Giyu. He constantly stayed around him and talked non-stop, to the point where Giyu was completely perplexed, wondering if this would continue for the rest of his life. After 4 painful days, Ju eventually gave in and revealed that he had not passed the final selection exam. Ju explained that a boy named Sabito had taken the final selection at the same time as him. Sabito killed almost all the demons completely alone and yet ended up failing, while in complete contrast, Ju had been injured by the first demon and fallen into a stupor. The next thing he knew was that the exam was over and that he had somehow survived. Ju tells Tanjiro that he thinks he is not worthy of becoming a Hashira because of this. He doesn't even feel he should stand beside the other pillars because he feels he doesn't deserve a place in the core of the demon hunters. As he begins to walk away from Tanjiro, he states that he will not manifest the mark, although Sabito might have, so don't bother him anymore, as it is a complete waste of time. Tanjiro thinks about Ju's feelings and bets that he wishes he had died in Sabito's place. He realizes that he understands this feeling so well that it hurts, noting that when someone is so important to you that you wish you had died in their place, it feels like you're being torn apart inside. He starts to remember Sabito and Makomo, who trained him even though they were supposedly dead. Comparing himself to Sabito, Tanjiro admires him for being able to protect and save everyone else in the final selection, while he could not. He notes that Sabito would have become a formidable swordsman if he had survived, which is obviously another reason why Ju might feel that he would be better off dead instead. Tanjiro, understanding his emotions, remembers Kyojuro, who also lost his life protecting him. In his mind, Tanjiro also believes that the Flame Hashira could have become capable enough to defeat Muzan, and he wishes he could have died in his place. Reflecting on what to say to Ju, he eventually decides to ask him if he wants to take advantage of what Sabito entrusted to him, which leaves the supposed Water Hashira completely stunned by Tanjiro's question. Important memories of his past suddenly begin to flood Ju's mind. The supposed Water Hashira remembers his past with Sabito scolding him and telling him to never say that he wished he had died. Sabito insisted that Ju had to live to protect others, not to disrespect his sister, who lost her life protecting him from a demon. In the present, in his mind, Ju apologizes to both Sabito and his sister for being so immature and forgetting this basic moral. While Tanjiro stands there observing a silent Ju, he believes he might have made a mistake by asking the question and has the idea of having a food contest, which might resolve the issue. After finally deciding to train with Tanjiro, Ju turns around, and before his words could reach him, Tanjiro suggests that the two have a food contest, and to his initial confusion, the Water Hashira ends up accepting. Elsewhere, the insect Hashira, Shinobu, can be seen running through the corridors of the Butterfly Mansion. Sitting before an altar, she tells herself to calm down, as only the immature cannot handle their emotions, leaving her to ponder the idea that she is probably immature, while she leans sadly over the general situation. Aoi receives her back into a room, announcing herself at the same time before asking if it was possible to train with a stone Hashira. Shinobu says she can't help with the training this time, to Aoi's confusion. When instructed to come closer, she tells Shinobu that she would like to train with her anyway, which improves Shinobu's overall mood, who tells Kanyua that she has greatly improved in expressing her feelings. Still confused, Aoi asks if it wasn't the right time, but to her visible surprise, Shinobu retorts, saying that now is the time to talk about how to kill the demon that killed her sister. Can it? Far away, a crow calls as it flies through the night and makes its entrance into the upper room of Tomio's house, warning her that it is dangerous to leave the windows open at night. The crow then introduces itself as a messenger from Kagaya Ubuyashiki and tells Tomio that she was extremely good at hiding. So good that its master had lost the ability to move completely during the time it took to find her. After a few more conversations between the two, the crow starts telling Tomio about their plan, which is that they would like her to go to the Ubuyashiki mansion to help study Muzan and finally help defeat the one and only Muzan Kibutsuji. As Tomio's heart races, her thoughts also race in her head as she ponders how, even as a demon, they asked her to go to the main hideout to help. After recovering from his battle against Hantengu, Tanjiro joined the joint training effort. He was welcomed by Tengen and his wives, completing their training in just 10 days. He then traveled to Muichiro's residence, where he was praised for having an even faster swordplay. Muichiro also focused on increasing Tanjiro's stamina by helping his muscles relax and tense more smoothly. After achieving this, Muichiro happily allowed Tanjiro to advance to the next training, even though only 5 days had passed. The next day, it was Mitsuri's turn to train Tanjiro. She exchanged some pleasantries with the young man before starting the task at hand. During the training, they moved in a manner reminiscent of ballerinas, constantly dancing as Mitsuri helped improve Tanjiro's flexibility with her own strength. This led to Tanjiro's next training session with the Serpent Hashira, Obanai. After an unpleasant greeting from his superior, Tanjiro was thrown into Obanai's version of the trial. The room was covered, and swordsmen were tied to the floor and walls, waiting to deliver strikes to Obanai while avoiding hitting these unfortunate souls. During the training between the two, Tanjiro was struck by his instructor, whose blows could weave like a snake between the tied individuals. Despite these difficulties, including hearing the terrified victims pleading not to be hit, Tanjiro eventually began to counterattack and avoid nocturnal strikes. After 4 days of hard work, he was allowed to proceed to the next section of the training with the Wind Hashira, Sanemi Shinazugawa. On his way, he encountered a visibly terrified Zenitsu, who had fled from the rigorous and brutal tutelage. However, as he screamed for Tanjiro to help him escape, Sanemi caught up to him, grabbing his head and threatening him to return to the facility before finally knocking him out. Sanemi then forced Tanjiro to carry his unconscious friend while running after the Hashira. The two exchanged harsh words, expressing their mutual hatred. After completing the training, it was revealed that Shinazugawa's training was so strenuous that Tanjiro understood why Zenitsu had become so frantic. He explained that it was just a simple exercise of strikes, where he would attack Sanemi. Each session continued without rest until he ended up vomiting blood and eventually fainted. When he woke up, Zenitsu cursed him, and Tanjiro realized that Shinazugawa had been excessively harsh on him, to the point where if he lost concentration for a moment, he could have been seriously injured. Still incredibly bruised from all this training, while walking back to his room, Tanjiro witnessed Sanemi and his younger brother. It was obvious that Genya was trying his best to talk to his brother, but despite this, he was threatened by the Hashira, who insisted that he had no brother and that if he didn't stop, he would kill him, leaving Genya standing there, sad and completely speechless. As Tanjiro listens intently to the confrontation between the Shinazugawa brothers, Sanemi directly disowns Genya as his brother. Distressed by this denial and his brother's lack of empathy, Genya tries to apologize for his mistakes. Secretly encouraged by Tanjiro, who was listening in, Genya reveals his desperation, explaining how he gained the ability to fight by eating demons. Sanemi suddenly stops and looks menacingly at Genya, questioning his words about eating demons. He disappears in an instant, causing Tanjiro to rush to Genya, knocking him to the ground to protect him from having his eyes gouged out by Sanemi. The two boys crash through the sliding door and fall into the outer garden, startling Zenitsu along with the other demon slayers. Tanjiro questions Sanemi for trying to kill his brother, but Sanemi corrects him, stating that he will only beat Genya until he no longer has the ability to regenerate, resulting in his retirement from the demon slayers. Incredulously, Tanjiro defends Genya, stating that he was crucial in defeating the high-ranking demon during their last encounter, and declares that he will protect him from his brother who has disowned him. Sanemi then turns to attack Tanjiro, but Tanjiro manages to block his punch and counterattack. As the fight between Tanjiro and Sanemi begins, Tanjiro quickly asks Zenitsu to take Genya away, which he does immediately. However, as Zenitsu takes Genya away, he insults his brother, causing Genya to slap Zenitsu on the head. Everything becomes chaotic from this point, and the chaos continues until the end of the night. Tanjiro receives an official reprimand from his superiors, and his training with the Wind Hashira is not only interrupted but he is also forbidden from approaching him again. In the end, Tanjiro fails to help mediate and repair the relationship between the Shinazugawa brothers. As the injured Tanjiro and Zenitsu make their way to the stone training ground, they find Inosuke and the other demon slayers training under a waterfall. They are greeted by the stone Hashira, who is nearby meditating in a fierce manner. This results in Zenitsu screaming when he sees that the Hashira is barefoot and surrounded by a halo of fire. Gyomei begins to explain the importance of his training, emphasizing that stabilizing the body with strong limbs will lead to precise attacks and industrious defense. His training module included 3 simple tasks. First, training under the waterfall. Second, carrying 3 logs on the shoulders. And finally, pushing a massive rock over a small hill. Although the training seemed easy, it was actually horrendous, and Zenitsu constantly complained about the freezing waterfall. Even Inosuke, who was working hard, ended up nearly drowning after reviving his friend. Tanjiro also trained under the waterfall and understood the lesson taught by Gyomei, emphasizing to the others that he was still conscious. While eating grilled fish with the other demon slayers, Inosuke claimed that the stone Hashira was the strongest in their organization. Tanjiro agreed, noting that Gyomei was the only one with a different scent. Zenitsu, on the other hand, still did not believe that Gyomei could move the rock easily, but he was perplexed when he saw the Hashira pushing an even larger rock. Eventually, Tanjiro and his friends managed to complete the training under the waterfall and carrying logs, but they still couldn't move the rock at all. Gyomei's training was difficult, but it wasn't completely mandatory. If you wanted to give up, you could always descend the mountain and quit. 6 days passed, and Tanjiro still couldn't move his rock. Despite all his training, the mark still hadn't appeared. As Tanjiro contemplated the current situation, Genya suddenly appeared and asked about Tanjiro's scar, noting that it was growing. He then told Tanjiro what happened to him after the conflict with his brother. He was reprimanded by Gyomei and told never to approach Sanemi again. Apparently, Genya was also in the rock training, and compared to Tanjiro, he could move his rock, which led him to question the latter if he knew about repeating actions. He then explained that Gyomei is bad at teaching, so you must observe him closely not to fail his training. Genya continued explaining that Gyomei was actually doing a predetermined set of movements to maximize his concentration. Gyomei could be seen eavesdropping as the two continued discussing repeating actions. Elsewhere, the eyes of demons were secretly tracking a single demon slayer as he walked through the streets. The eyes belonged to Nakeheim, who was spying on the whereabouts of the demon slayers, while she and Muzan remained hidden within the Infinity Castle. She reported that she had determined the location of about 60 of all the demon slayers, while she and Muzan remained hidden within the Infinity Castle. However, she still had absolutely no idea about the whereabouts of the girl who conquered the sun. She reported her findings to Muzan, who praised her growth and silently declared that he would soon find both Nezuko and Obuyashiki. Due to his lack of talent to become an apprentice, Genya resorted to eating demons to become stronger. Gyomei introduced Genya to Shinobu to check his condition, but each time she saw him, she made a face of disgust and scolded him. However, Tanjiro comments that Shinobu was only concerned about Genya's body and invites him to visit Ju together to talk about his brother once they finish. But Genya refuses, as he hasn't finished training with the stone Hashira, saying he still needs to move the stone by a Cho. On his way to meet Ju, Tanjiro saw Zenitsu on top of his stone and asked if he was okay since they hadn't talked for a while, which worried him. Zenitsu tells Tanjiro that he simply gained clarity about what he should do, what he must do. Tanjiro tries to get more information from Zenitsu, but all he gets is that he must do what he must do. Before leaving, Zenitsu ends up giving in a little and thanks Tanjiro, telling him that he is truly a good person. But, standing there with the most determined look of his life, he reiterates that there is something he absolutely must do. Then, Tanjiro visits Ju's place, and upon arriving, he sees Ju and Sanemi fighting with wooden swords in hand. Their movements are so fast, but he notices that he can follow their movements. The battle ends with both Ju and Sanemi's swords breaking after a clash of breathing techniques, and Sanemi suggests they continue fighting with their fists. Suddenly, Tanjiro interrupts them and suggests they just share some ohagi, which makes Sanemi even more irritated, given that he and Tanjiro shouldn't be near each other. After a somewhat passive-aggressive conversation, Sanemi storms off angrily, and Ju notes that each Hashira also participates in each other's training. He also plans to hide some ohagi in a bag to give to Sanemi in an attempt to get along with him. As Sanemi is leaving Ju's place furiously, he notices something following him in the nearby foliage. He instantly grabs it from the ground and then crushes it with his fingers. Confused, Sanemi wonders what it could be. Elsewhere, at the exact same moment, the generational meeting is about to take place under the starry and moonlit night. Kagaya Obuyashiki welcomes Muzan Kibutsuji to his home as their first meeting begins. As the demon Muzan slowly approaches Obuyashiki, he remarks that he seems to be in an unpleasant condition